Hello, welcome to today's lesson. So today we'll be talking about the difference between the pallet and the mash. But before we go into that, let me talk about the basic food that is being required to rear a broiler bird. Now, the broiler bird requires two different types of feed based on the crude protein and the metabolizable energy that the bird needs. You have the super starter and or the starter, then we have the finisher. But basically birds are being fed four different type of feed, either the whole grain or the mash feed or the pellet feed or the crumble. So but remember, as I said, this starter and the finisher can be presented in this different form apart from the whole grain. The starter and the finisher can either be presented in the form of the mash or the pellet. The finisher can also be presented in the form of the mash or the pellet. So these basic forms are the presentation of feed. Now, the whole grain. The whole grain is when you feed your birds with whole grain like corn, maize, millet, sorghum, barley. You now feed them. Those in the village you can understand. They just bring it and throw it to the birds and the birds feed on them. But if you are feeding your birds with this type of feed, the rest assured that their growth rate, the energy conserved, the feed is not well balanced. These birds now go into the environment to scavenge for some micronutrients and everything. But if you want to use commercial feed, you have two options. Either to present this food to them as mash or as pellet. Now, let's talk about the mash. The mash. The mash is when you grind this whole grain, you mix them with some micronutrients, the vitamins, the methionine, some amino acids. Then at the end of the day, you provide a balanced diet which you give to these birds. As you give them these nutrients, these birds are being fed, they grow very well. Now, advantage of using mash feed is that one, it is economical. If you go to the market, you want to buy feed now, the price of a mash feed is cheaper than the price of a pelletized feed. So this is one of the advantage of giving your birds mash feed. Another advantage of giving your birds mash feed is that when you look at these birds that feed on mash, they all grow uniformly. So if you want to achieve uniformity in your farm, you're growing your broilers, you'll be able to get uniformity using mash feed. Another advantage that you have in using mash feed is that the homogeneity and if they ground and how they present themselves is also good for the birds. But mash feed also have some disadvantages. And what are the disadvantages of using mash feed? So one, as I told you before, birds are grain pickers. So naturally, God made them to be grain pickers. So you see, so when you give them this mash feed, the palatability of the feed is being reduced. And because the palatability is being reduced, they don't tend to feed on this feed very well. And as because they are grain eaters, when they are feeding on mash, you find out that the quantity of feed that they pack and the energy required to pick this feed is much. So the energy required to feed on mash feed is very high. So the activity that are required to feed on it is also high. So thereby reducing the nutrient that they need to absorb in their body because they spend much energy in eating. Another disadvantage of using the mash feed is that the mash feed, these birds as they are feeding, they tend to do what is known as selective feeding. So they select nutrients, they select ingredients as they feed on this mash feed. So thereby, as they select the grains inside and they select all those nutritive ingredients inside, they now leave the powdery form. And this powdery form, as the nutrients, there are some of the essential amino acids, some vitamins that are good for the health of these birds. So thereby, you find out that there is wastage of feed. So another disadvantage of feeding mash feed is that these birds tend to waste feed as they browse through this feed to pick all those grains and the bigger particles. They tend to pour away some of the feed, thereby wasting feed. So we talk about one, the feed is less palatable. Two, the birds are selective, so there's segregation feeding in nutrients, thereby they're not feeding on good diet, they're not feeding on nutritive diet. Three, we talk about the energy dissipated as they feed, and now four, we talk about wastage. Five, now as they waste this food now fall on the ground, thereby becoming stale. The birds cannot pick on this feed, and thereby the feed become remnant on the ground that can invite rodents into your farm. And you know what rodent can do in your farm. When you find rodent in your farm, you find out that at the end of the day, these rodents are carriers of diseases. Your birds come down with a lot of diseases due to this bacteria, that these rodents introduce. And sometimes these rodents can be a menace, especially if you are brooding. You find out that this rodent can eat the head of your chicks, destroy some of your birds as a result of what your feed that fall on the ground and invite them to come and dine in your farm. So you see, mash is something else. So if you want to use mash in your farm, please be prepared for all these things, so that at the end of the day your investment will be safeguarded. Then apart from that, another thing that mash feed can lead is respiratory disease. These fine dust, these fine particles, as these birds are browsing to pick the bigger grains, you find out that the dust can result to respiratory disease, both for the person feeding them and the birds eating themselves. So they can sometimes come down, they are predisposed to CRD, to respiratory diseases, respiratory distress as a result of this. So you see, mash food, not that I'm condemning mash food totally, but these are some of the things you face when you are feeding mash feed to your birds. The mash feed is also important. Please don't get me wrong. Mash feed is also good when the quality of the ingredient used in producing this feed is good, and with high energy feed with good ingredients, mash feed is good. Your birds will grow good, and with good management practice where the feeder is being raised so that they should avoid a lot of loss as they browse through the feed, you find out that mash food can also give you good results. But the next type of feed that we're going to talk about is the pellet. The pellet, yes, the pellet. The pellet is a form of the mash feed that have undergone some process known as pelletization. Pelletization involves when this mash feed is then passed through steam and high pressure, so that they will produce some cylindrical size of the feed known as the pellet. Now these pellets, they are cylindrical in shape, and they contain all the ingredients in one pellet, so that when this bird pick a pellet, then this pellet will now become like an artificial grain to the birds. So it become like what I call artificial grain. So it is a grain form whereby these birds can pick and eat and be able to digest the food. So we found out that the pellet is good for the birds. One of the advantages of the pellet is that one, it is very palatable. The process of gelatinization through the what we call extrusion process to make the feed to be pellet, thereby digest the feed small. There's partial digestion of the feed, so this feed become more palatable to the birds. So the birds feed more due to that process, that heat process. So you find out that the feed is more palatable. Another advantage of pelletized feed is that that waste is drastically reduced. Remember, they will not be browsing again. They just be picking one after the other. So thinking about throwing away the feed is minimized. So the birds will be able to pick the feed, and waste is being avoided. Now, if waste is being avoided, what will happen next? These birds will feed. They require less energy to feed. As they pick, digest, pick, digest. So they require less energy in digestion of this feed. Remember, I told you that the feed is partially digest, unlike the whole grain or the mash that require more energy, more energy activity to feed. But in the pellet form, they don't require much energy. So they just pick it, take it, a whole nutrient is inside a pellet. So at the end of the day, you find out that they require less energy to digest that feed, and the feed, the pelletized feed is easily digestible. So we find out that the durability of the palatability of the pellet is very good. Another advantage of the pellet feed is that um, due to the heat process that this mash undergo to form a pellet, all those toxic chemicals that are found in feed and some biological, bacteriological organisms that might be found in the feed will be destroyed through the heat process. That's what is known as heat treatment. So now that heat treatment makes sure that toxic chemicals and non-nutritive substances are neutralized in the feed. You find out that the feed will be more wholesome to the birds, and at the end of the day, there will be less disease outbreak in the flock that are using pellet. So we found out that these birds will be more healthy, there will be more livability in birds feeding on pelletized feed. One other advantage of using pellet feed is that the pellet also ensure that there is more secretion of enzymes and digestive enzymes as the birds feed on this pellet. As I told you, birds are grain eaters. So, and the proventriculus, the crop contains some enzyme and enzymatic activity that increase their secretion as a result of these grains that found themselves in these regions. So we found out that these birds will be able to, eating pellet increase the digestibility of food, and if there's increase in digestibility of feed, there will be increase in absorption of the nutrient. So these birds grow better, and it has been found out that birds that feed on pellet eat 10% less compared to birds that feed on mash. That is, you are saving more money into your account, and when you save more money with the increase of feed in the market, you find out that that is good to the farmer. 10%. So 10% reduction in feed consumption if you are using pellet compared to mash. Another advantage that you have if you are feeding your birds with pelletized feed is that there is reduction in the activities of rodent, because there's reduction in waste, so you don't find those things. The rodents will not come and dine in your farm. So at the end of the day, you find a pellet. So in pellet, there is increase in the live body weight ratio if you are feeding your birds with pellet. Another thing, if you are feeding your birds with pellet, is that there is also increase in meat bone ratio of approximately 3%. If you are also feeding your birds with pellet, there is reduction in mortality. So feeding your birds with pellet is very good, but mind you, is not all pellet in the market that have that same quality. The quality of pellet can be affected by the pelletization process. So you can find out there are many pellets in the market, but all of them are not of the same quality. The reason is due to what? Due to the pelletization process. So during the pelletization process, the quality of the pellet can be affected. The question is, how will I be able to know which pellet is better than the other? Now, there are two criteria used in determining the quality of pelletized feed. One is the hardness, and two is the durability. Now, what did I mean by the hardness? When they form this cylindrical form, if they can easily break during the transportation from the factory from the factory to the logistic, from the logistic to the farm, from the farm to the feeding trough, you find that they easily break, very easily to break. They find out that pelletizing process was not good. Then another thing, we'll talk about the durability, that is the fineness that they produce. When you find out that when you take a bag from the factory to the logistic down to the farm to the trough, I find out that as they move, there is more finer particles like dust being given out easily. Then that pelletization process was not that good enough, and that pellet will not give the required expectation that the farmer wants. So these two criteria are what we use in knowing how qualitative a pelletized feed is. So Pellet feed are good like mash, but remember, the quality of the ingredient that was used in producing this feed determines how qualitative is the feed. So please note, when you are choosing the type of feed you want to feed your birds, ensure you get it from a reputable company. Now let's talk about the crumble. Basically, pelletized feed are fed for adult birds, but we want to use pelletized feed for young birds. You use what is known as what? The crumble. Now the crumble is a form of what? Pelletized feed that have been broken down into smaller pieces so that young birds can be able to feed on these birds. Young birds like day-old chicks, birds from week 1 to week 3 or week 4, they can be able to feed on this after being broken. Sometimes even adult birds are being fed crumbles. So the crumbles have the same advantages that pellet have. So all these feed put together are the different forms of feed that broiler feed has been presented. Remember, I told you broiler feed is divided into three: the super starter, the starter, and the finisher. So in some climates, you'll see they have the super starter, the starter, the grower, and finisher. In some countries, they have even finisher 1, finisher 2. So based on which climate that you find yourself, all these type of feeds or broilers are being presented either in the mash form, or in the pellet form, or in the crumble form. But remember, all this is geared so that these birds can be able to get good nutrition and grow properly. So at the end of the day, the expected weight that you want to get for that circle, you are able to get it. So both the pellet feed, both the mash feed, they are good if the ingredients used to produce that feed is of high quality. Remember, apart from the quality of feed, management practice also matters. If you have good management practice, you are going to succeed in this game, and I will see you at the other side of success. So please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, click on the notification button so that by next week when we start talking about housing is one of another thing that affects your production. So we're going to talk about housing, we're going to talk about stocking density, the space that you need to require for the number of birds that you want to keep in a pen. All this will be discussed in our next week, in our next topic. So please subscribe so at the end of the day, when we release the video, you'll be able to watch it. Thank you. See you at the other side of success.